Okay, hello and welcome everyone. This is the first event of the virtual symposium, Recursive Colonialism, Artificial Intelligence and Speculative Computation. We are the Critical Computation Bureau, a collective of researchers, artists, and writers working at the intersection of technology and culture, computer science and information theory, aesthetics, and politics. RCAISC 2020 aims to provide interventions in the technopolitics of racial capitalism and its recursive regeneration, mixing together critical and creative practices and borrowing models and methods from philosophy of technology, Black studies, political theory, computer science and information theory, media aesthetics, cultural, and digital media theories. Please check our manifesto on the website and the online special issue Control Societies at 30, published in the Periscope of Social Text Online. We also thank Duke University, which has sponsored this symposium together with the University of Pennsylvania and University of Naples L'Orientale. For more information on this project or to contact us, please feel free to check out our website, www.recursivecolonialism.com, and to follow our socials. My name is Ezekiel Dixon-Roman. My co-facilitator is Oana Parvan. We've called this first day of the symposium Episode 00, Black Poethics and Contagious Architecture. And we've associated today's dialogue with a series of screenings of the Finding Fanon series by Larry Achiapong and David Blandy, which you can find on our website, accompanied by an original text written by our curators, Alessandra Felito and Olga Solobrino. The format of this session will be the following. Our guests will both talk for 20 minutes each, then 10 minutes each in response. After that, the speakers will address a few questions that you can type into your Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Please remember to state clearly which speaker your question is addressed to. Our co-facilitator will pick up as many questions as possible, and the chair, myself, will address them to the panelists. I also want to remind the speakers not to check the Q&A box, as all questions will be verbally asked by the chair. Please type in your question in the Q&A box at any time of the session. Also, please remember that the session is streamed live on our YouTube channel as well. Today, we are very proud to host a dialogue between our guest, Denise Ferreira da Silva and Luciana Parisi. Denise Ferreira da Silva is professor and director of the Institute for Gender, Race, Sexuality and Social Justice at the University of British Columbia, Vancouver. An academic and practicing artist, Dr. Denise Ferreira da Silva's work addresses the ethico-political challenges of the global present. She is the author of Toward a Global Idea of Race, Dívida Impagavel, Unpayable Debt, and co-editor with Paula Chakravartty of Race, Empire, and the Crisis of the Subprime. Luciana Parisi's research is a philosophical investigation of technology and culture, aesthetics, and politics. She is a professor in media philosophy at the program in literature and the Computational Media, Arts, and Cultures program at Duke University. She is the author of Abstract Sex, Philosophy, Biotechnology, and the Mutations of Desire, and Contagious Architecture, Computation, Aesthetics, and Space. She is completing a monograph on alien epistemologies and the transformation of logical thinking in computation. Welcome to you both, and over to Luciana.
Thank you, Ezekiel. I thank you, Denise, for being with us in this dialogue today. I just also want to thank our media team and Oana and Oana Parvan and Brian D'Aquino for supporting our event today. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, sorry. Oops, sorry. Okay. Okay. So today I address the limits of critical computation, automated reasoning, and artificial intelligence. I discuss technopoetics in computation as a method and a model that refuses and overturns the concept of autopoiesis, the self-making of being and thought, of identity and difference, of inclusion and exclusion at the core of the colonial project of speciation and racialization of knowledge. I see two main theses of this critique, which I suggest preserve the Aristotelian distinction between episteme or theoria, poiesis or creation, and techniques as the practical knowledge, skills, procedures, functions, that subtend the bifurcation of mind and nature, reason and intelligence, concepts and object, thought and tools. In particular, I see autopoiesis or creative making as that which is given ownership of the time and space of modern thought, knowledge and reason over and upon techniques as discrete procedures, information and intelligence. On the one hand, the critical thesis that can be called master algorithm and computational surveillance seems to inherit from Martin Heidegger's reflections on technique and on the critique of instrumental reasons, the view that automated calculus has taken over philosophical decision. On the other hand, instead, the thesis that I call platform capitalism or tool of resistance focuses on techniques as an anti-ideological repurposing of the master tools, a technopolitics where the full automation of labor can free human time from capital time. I will unpack this thesis soon, but now I want to suggest that this critique of technology in general seems to fit what Sylvia Wynter calls cosmogony, or origin story of knowledge. Cosmogony, I suggest, includes the myth of Prometheus, the autopoietic creator and maker of the world. Prometheus promises human progress against the forces of nature and law. He gives the technology of fire to humanity to concretize man's hope for a future free from the unknown. What remains the surrogate figure of this myth is the servomechanics flash of technique as material matrix through which the racialization of knowledge and the speciation of the human is preserved. This is a model of enslavement that sustained the hierarchical order of colonialisms and the universality of cultural differences under which Prometheus capitalism promises to save us all. I argue that servomechanic intelligence has been systematically neglected, dismissed, and abandoned by critique as a mindless medium, as non-conscious function, as nonsensical language, improper knowing. To overturn this cosmogony, I discuss techniques as instrumentality, a pragmatic know-how, as the condition for generating alien cosmogonies. Starting from speculative computation, a logic of indeterminacy at the core of machine thinking, one can betray the poiesis of racial capitalism, the authority of philosophy, and Promethean sapiens. It is only from the standpoint of improper, inhuman thinking that artificial intelligence can set forth the possibility of a critical computation that each time runs with the alien patternings of thinking machines, an interactive syntax generating artificial knowledge. In this dialogue with Denise today, I would like to discuss possibility of artificial knowledge in terms of what Octavia Butler already called xenogenesis, the dimension of alienness to the genesis or formation of knowledge in human thinking. I understand the inhuman condition of enslaved instrumentality as practices or know-hows, generating knowledges of another kind. Techniques is not mindless, but as a technopoetics, it can account for how the entanglements of technology and colonialisms also require a re-envisioning of automated reason as automated blackness. I think that the radical work carried out by Black feminist studies in pushing for a transformation of cognition through the ungrounding of epistemological models, such as mathematics, such as, for example, in the work of Catherine McKittrick, Mathematics, Black Life, and the work of Denise Ferreira da Silva, One stand to life as 10 to 0, as blackness equals infinities minus infinities, or infinities over infinities on matter beyond the equation of value, already show the possibility for artificial intelligence in terms of what in the recursive colonialist manifesto we've called black allopoetics and cosmo-computation. With this premise, I will now discuss the thesis of the master algorithms and computational surveillance versus the thesis of platform capitalism and tools of resistance, and then move on to the problem of Promethean poesis versus techno-poetics. The thesis of master algorithms and computational surveillance argues that the concretization of reasoning machine coincides with an epistemological order of data governance, corporate surveillance, and planetary computation, where algorithmic modeling, ranking, visualization, recommendation repackage the biases of transcendental categories in patterns of recognition. The demise of reason by the hands of machines brings forward the configuration of knowledge and power in the image of variable modulations of transcendental categories, representing the world as we know it. The automated nomos of decision-making, interaction, and networking is set to define the new regime of sovereign computation, where Prometheus man becomes one with the master algorithm. As social injustice continues to cross higher thresholds of tolerance in the Promethean state war against blackness, the recursive entanglement of computation and colonialism is enlarging the surrogate labor in the global south and increasingly expanding the conditions of slow death everywhere. Automated reason distributes recursive function at all levels of living by scripting results towards one and the same output. It is not a surprise, therefore, that chatbots can only have conversations that intensify the epistemological fixities of categories, matching names, jobs, hairstyles with biased concepts of race, gender, sexuality, and class. Similarly, it is not a surprise that current generative adversarial networks, GAN, make fake identities, placing the categories of sex, gender, race, ethnicity under a morphing modulation of oneness. In a recent article in the New York Times, the growing business of deepfakes takes machine learning algorithms in GAN to create faces of people that do not exist. The website, This Person Does Not Exist.com, takes computation as a virtualization of categories, where the diversibility of software fulfills the benevolent racism of Promethean autopoiesis. As AI is set to extend the cosmogony of modern categories, recursive epistemologies maintain the mirage of diversity within the bioeconomic model of survival and success. As Winter reminds us, with modernity, the universality of scientific knowledge becomes the epistemological ground of Judeo-Christian metaphysics, where the origin of knowledge is supported by the analytics of speciation and racialization. This cosmogony is now seen at work in the sociogenic datification of the flesh, as the narrative of bioeconomic survival is enfolded in the neurobiological architecture of cognition. Promethean sociogenesis continues to program necroentropic instructions that preserve man as the parametric variable of difference. This critique of computation, however, mirrors the totalitarian view of sovereign computation, where automated reason fits the image of mindless function imitating the self-creativity of man. By neglecting the technical know-hows of machine intelligence, this thesis espouses the critique of instrumental reason that conceives means and techniques such as procedure, function, discretization, quantification as a threat to human reason and the self-making freedom of man. The thesis of platform capitalism and tools of resistance instead has seen a plethora of radical techno-political imaginaries, as those defined in the work of Tiziana Terranova with Uninomade, the work of accelerationism and xenofeminism, leading to a retheorization of instrumentality. The latter refocused on know-hows as possibility for counteracting, misusing technological platforms, turning high-tech capital and the surplus value of surrogate labor into collective practices of, in quote, building of tools to build new freedoms, to quote the Xenofeminist Manifesto. The technopolitical statement of freedom towards another future as a retooling of living takes full automation as a paradox to subtract labor from capital, social time from the speed of capital reproduction. Instead of a critique of instrumental reason still found in Giorgio Agamben as much as in Deleuze and Guattari, I see accelerationist interventions as a self-critique within techno-capital epistemology. This means that intelligent tools or fixed capital are rather potentialized to be part and parcel of the heteroglossемatics of collective subjectivities in the struggle against the extraction of value. Here, tools are practices that break through and against the computational sovereignty of high-tech corporations. While I share this vision for enlarging access and retooling algorithms, I also think that repurposing must more deeply abolish the ontoepistemological architecture that sustains the Promethean theology of survival through the servomechanic surrogacy of blackness. As Lord asks, what does it mean when the tools of a racist patriarchy are used to examine the fruits of that same patriarchy? It means that only the most narrow parameters of change are possible and allowable. Existing parameters of computation and artificial intelligence must be hacked against the critique of technology, which ends up preserving the originary creativity or poiesis of philosophy as the true condition for techniques to be rescued for the surrogate state of being merely enslaved to a mindless series of functions. As Promethean self-making keeps the promise of repurposing the aims of techniques, or liberating techniques from its own slavery, the latter continues to perform the servomechanics incompleteness of enslaved knowledge and labor. At the core of this thesis, therefore, there lies a critique of technology that can be derived from Martin Heidegger and the critique of instrumental reason that see the algorithm, to quote Ezekiel Dixon-Roman, of the modern world as a threat to the wholeness of the modern categories of knowledge. Warning us against the modern crisis of being, Heidegger urges us to reoriginate the task of philosophy by turning to a pre-Socratic union of poiesis and thinking as creators of knowledge. We also find this view in Friedrich Kittler, who sees computation as ontology, a thinking or doing, a know-how that acts and performs without logic and without reason. While Heidegger's recuperation of a pre-Socratic poiesis, a thinking in the making, grounds ontology beyond functions, his modern question of technology maintains that machines can only perform, implement, accelerate, automate programmed categories of knowledge. Here, the Promethean creative thought becomes absorbed within the recursive colonialisms that want servomechanic know-hows to never think on their own. Thinking as creative poiesis is against the non-organic procedures of algorithmic rules, making sure that the inhuman remains the negative negation of the human. The inhuman is and must stand for the inclusive excluded in Promethean cosmogonies, a surrogate flesh, mindless instrumentality. This anti-creative mimesis still defines artificial intelligence in its cultural manifestation as know-how that performs tasks efficiently, decide intelligently, but cannot originate concepts, models, theories, languages, knowledges, because anything machine can do must fit the autopoietic universe of man. After all, these machines don't know what they are doing, don't know the value of their processing, don't know how to make their outputs count, don't know what they are saying. To claim for a return to poiesis before instrumentality, therefore, is to preserve the metaphysical infrastructure of racial capital as it was pre-forming in the pre-modern times at the very pre-origin of Greek philosophy. A return to the Greek matrix of thought, where making and thinking are the same, denies the balance of the original cosmogony of civil society and its reliance on servomechanic doing. This preserves the original split of techniques from poiesis, a function from creativity, and from epistemology, the authority of philosophical decision and human sapience. What is needed to rehearse critique with other Lord is a refusal of the tools of the master and a refusal of automated reasoning to become human, a reconditioning of technocultural parameters, of technopolitical logic, of techno-economic protocols to deeply hack the recursive colonialism of Promethean capitalism. My proposition is a move against poiesis and towards technopoetics, where the condition of incompleteness and indeterminacy in logical thinking become the pillars of automated reason. Starting from the collective reassemblage of know-hows, algorithmic functions are not to be grounded in concept, but in the interactivity of agents or rules composing a syntactic matrix of local actions, where the positions of words activates meaning, moving from one data set to another, but also from left to right, up and down. The interactive logic of computation brings forward a syntax in terms of processing indeterminate possibility in the generation of languages that manifest machine speculative reasoning, whose meaning is said to be nonsensical. Here, alien concepts result from deeply meaningful and yet incomprehensible actions words, an algorithmic fractality pregnant with counterfactual outputs. Not the failure of techniques to logically communicate, but a refusal to communicate in the language of the master, a refusal to speak human. I see this speculative computation in the artwork of Jenna Sutella, in her audiovisual work, Nenia Ceti, where machine learning generates its own language out of the interaction between a neural network, or audio recordings of early Martian language, and a footage of the movements of bacteria in space. Another example of speculative computation is in artificial intelligence conversations. Recently, while training machine learning agents with negotiation software, researchers at Facebook realized their bots were chattering in incomprehensible language and shut their conversation down. The two agents, trading in a language to get the best deal, used generative adversarial network with no incentive to speak English. Instead of following the syntactic structure of English grammar, the AI's agent started rearranging legible words into seemingly nonsensical sentences, yet full of a logical reasoning that directed the meaning of their trading. So what does it mean to refuse the tools of the master? With computation, poiesis clashes with instrumentality and becomes technopoetics, a non-creative practice, non-original, not performative, not efficient, not organic, a generative reasoning in the quantification, discretization of infinities. We can understand this generativity not in terms of the Heideggerian view of techniques as a teleology of causal efficacy, but more in terms of Octavia Butler's insistence on what happens in the inhospitable violence of the world. constraining know-hows to generate inhuman epistemology and logical reasoning out of this world. This is not the cosmogony of the same and difference, but a xenogenesis that refuses the organic history of sapiens by taking the interaction of rules as a mediation of a real that is not given in thought. This is automated reasoning of an alien kind, one conditioned by the ingression of incomputables or infinities in algorithmic language. Technopoetics is not about running through the mindless efficiency of innumerable possibility. It is instrumental reasoning, where its syntactical functions become generative of meaning other than what they were programmed for. By refusing to become human, artificial intelligence remains its own thinking medium in the spatial configuration of interactive algorithms. Here, technopoetic practices entail a misappropriation of the function and structures of language in the algorithmic fractality of meaning. Speculative computation is today's site for hijacking the servomechanic model of techniques, for hijacking this model towards a dynamic space of incomputability, infinities that are at odds with wholeness, but that are at ease with cosmocomputational epistemologies. Speculative computation thus calls for a black or allopoetics that builds with and wants to build with and through what Denise Ferreira da Silva calls feminist black poetics, the possibility of non-human knowing without modern categories. With this suggestion, I conclude by asking, how can automated reasoning and black allopoetics provide together a non-human language, a generative technique that becomes knowing and knowledge of another kind? And I'll leave you with this quote by Denise. Because neither space nor time, our fundamental descriptors of the world seem to be immediately retrievable from universal reasons, rather limited stance before the world. Blackness' capacity to signify otherwise, beyond universality, and its particular arrangement of space and time, but also away from transcendentality, self-determination, invites a consideration of the possibility of knowing without modern categories. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana. And now we'll hear from Denise Ferreira da Silva.
Thank you, Ezekiel. Hi, everyone. I would like to thank Luciana and Ezekiel for the invitation to be part of this series of conversations. And also I'd like to thank Oana, Brian, and the Medium team for making it possible for me to be part of it. I am really very excited about being here. And I've spent the past few days trying to figure out how to talk about Black feminist poetics until I realized that there is no talking about it, really. So what I've decided to do in these 20 minutes that I have is basically to share with you an example. An example, so it's not a description or a demonstration of how Black feminist poetics does what it does. This example just, it's an example of the how it does confrontation and refusal. I open with a quote from the Dred Scott v. Sanford case of 1856, if I'm not mistaken. So quote, for a free Negro of the African race whose ancestors were brought to this country and sold as slaves is not, quote, a citizen, end quote, within the meaning of the Constitution of the United States. 6, the only two clauses in the Constitution which point to this race treat them as persons whom it was morally lawful to deal in as articles of property and to hold as slaves, end quote. If that which was then there morally lawful has yet to be extricated from and is actually relentlessly actualized by the category of Blackness, the crucial question becomes then how to approach existence from the scene of total violence without rewriting Blackness as, in Fred Moulton's words, a function, or how to release Blackness from within its categorical holdings where it is more apt to dismantle the modern grammar. This task defines Black feminist poetical practice, and I'll comment on it with the help of Octavia Butler's character, Dana, from her novel Kindred. So if you don't know the novel, I'm sorry, because I'm not going to give you much details, and those of you who know the novel will understand what I'm referring to. So I have to say that this is not an easy task for many reasons. Two of them are evident in Dana's charge, actually in the very description of her predicament. The first reason, which relates to what Moulton calls ongoing present, has an implication to how one describes the ethic and the economic scenes of value. On the one hand, her obligation to save her ancestral honor, even if in order to preserve her own existence, carries a very particular handling of materiality into a domain, the ethic, in which it should not play a role. Forget for a moment how hers is an obligation that, as it is in the case with anything that becomes a signifier of the condition Blackness identifies, immediately displaces the two major items in the modern ethic grammar, namely liberty and equality. Forget, in other words, that slavery is a juridic economic relation in which Dana is a property like Dred Scott, and Rufus, when she's back in Antebellum, Maryland, has a title claim over her. Now try and consider Dana's obligation ethically, merely in terms of moral principles, such as thou shalt not kill, or act as if your maxim is a universal law. It is nonsensical because these refer respectively to the authority of God or the universality of the moral law, and her obligation does not belong to these registers. Having to protect on the basis of blood relations is a demand that recalls a different ethic register, one which is a reference of the family, with obvious links to patriarchy, of course, but which in the context of slavery, it refers to the elemental, her body, actually the code, the DNA that guides its constitution, is the only link between Dana and Rufus. In her family history, he's an owner who took a slave. Being Black, her great-great-grandmother is always a slave. As a lover, and without a statement from the woman as to whether or not theirs was a romantic liaison, even if there was one, because he is her owner, theirs is not a relation between equals. The juridical relation in the form of title overrides the sentimental aspect that presumably accompanies family relations. The sentimental aspect that presumably accompanies family relations is not there. Furthermore, there is no possibility for a claim based on identity between Dana and Rufus. So it doesn't matter whether the opposite would be the case between Dana and her several times great-grandmother, because Dana's charge is to save Rufus' life, not Alice's, her great-great-grandmother. But my point is to recall that Dana saves Rufus' life several times, not because of affect, inclination, sentiment, belief, or desire. None of the motives Kant dismisses, precisely because of their being linked to previous conceptions of morality. None of them matter to her. Nor does it matter to her because she had no choice, self-interest or self-determination, as to whether or not to travel in time to save his life. So it doesn't matter to her that Rufus is a human being, as in a being with intrinsic value, that is, with humanity. None of this matter because, as the principle of liberty directs, As a slave, she is not ethically human and a thing to which someone has a juridic value. So she's a slave, she's a human and a thing. All that connects them, all that connect them, Rufus and Dana, which is also the ongoing present of Dana. Dana shares with Rufus and other slaves. All that connect them is her flesh. Organs, cells, molecules, atoms, protons, electrons, nucleons. For this reason, Dana's charge allows us to ask a question that does not have any significance in an epic moment governed by humanity and its principles, liberty and dignity, and also by the tools of raciality. And the question is, what if ethic descriptions had at their core a commonality that's not mediated by identity, as shared particularly that is familial, national, historical, nor by liberty, some kind of general equality, but one which is established through the universality of some shared ideas? What if ethic descriptors presumed not substantive identity or formal equality, that is substantive commonality, that is figured as that which, figured as that is a temporal or a spatial and yet fundamentally immanent? Maybe asked more directly, what if the basis of our ethical program was simply that everything that exists, has existed, and may come to exist is made of the same raw material, the elementa, the subatomic particle waves, the decomposition of which allows us to say anything about existence? If we begin, as I do, with a positive answer for this question, such a point of departure for thinking troubles the very notion of value. On the other hand, then, Dana's charge exposes a breach in the play of value, which again is activated by her body's travels across different moments of her ongoing present. The breach, to be sure, occurs due to the tear of the symbolic membrane that separates the ethic and the economic themes of value. So this is not the register of measures and principles. Without an economic aspect that can be monetized, Dana's obligation has an economic significance that cannot be calculated in an extension to the future or the past, or it cannot be operationalized through arithmetic or computed through using algorithms. Her obligation cannot be formalized or translated into mathematical, geometry, algebra, arithmetic, calculus, mathematical formats through which it could be then equated with the money form. Nonetheless, Dana's incomprehensible moral obligation is so because instituted by a colonial juridic economic structure, slavery, and secured by its juridical form and method of governance, title and total violence, respectively, and related rendering of authority. Here, the correspondence, which always works across time, is between the physicality of the relation, which was not a familiar one, and the fact that Dana had to protect the physical integrity of someone who could kill, rape, maim her in order to ensure her own physical existence. Lacking papers that would verify but not protect her condition as a freed or born free Black person, Dana occupies a troubling position in the colonial context, a Black woman who had never been enslaved, traded, or freed. Troublesome but not uncommon, not dissimilar from other Black persons existing in that same spatial temporal moment. Not having papers that could be torn up, Dana exists in Antebellum, Maryland in a manner similar that Dred Scott and all other enslaved persons lived in Missouri. Their juridical positions are incomprehensible. Dana's because there could be no such a person who was Black without ever being property. Dred Scott's because there is no such a person who was Black and no longer a property. Focusing on the papers, that is, on the captive body as the object of a title, attends to the various moments and modalities of deployment of force to uncover how necessity works with, through skin color, and the social scientific categories which, like ethnicity, prefigure total violence in the political symbolic moment. For grounding the juridical is to begin with the moment of decision determination. Why? Think of those occasions when, as in the US Supreme Court's decision in the Dred Scott v. Sanford case, the juridical is exposed as a site of operation of necessity and not liberty. Whatever else the phrase morally lawful does in paragraph 6 may be relevant, but here I focus on what it does in terms of signaling an exception within the ethic juridic category of the persons of the African race. The key to this improper juridical standing is obviously the equivalence of Blackness and property, which results in that the Black person, even with papers, occupies the juridical position of slave. That is, the equivalence of skin color and property registers the Black person's lack of protection, hence the otherwise oxymoronic phrase morally lawful, protection afforded by the law to the citizenry, which is the necessity that justify juridical authority. At the same time, however, this very juridical form of property holds the key to unravel the equivalence, because having a title over a person's body does not alone assure the use of her capacities, for it is the authority to deploy physical violence that institutes the position of the owner who extracts and expropriates slave labor. What comes to the fore here is precisely how the category of property functions as the relay, as it performs juridical mediation between the economic and ethical scenes of value. Read through the decision, that is, by attending to juridical mediation, in the case of property title that justifies and authorizes the citizen to employ coercive physical violence against persons, Blackness, not as skin color, but as that which identifies the captive body, Blackness also indexes how the possibility of negativation resides in necessity, that is, on the fact that necessity, force, and form upholds liberty. Liberty, the foremost modern ethical principle, directly or indirectly figured as equality, can only render violence here. That is, Dana's charge is a breach of the ethical scene because it signals that the presupposed exclusive attribute of the proper modern economic subject is contingent upon its opposite, that is, the slave's captivity. The second reason, which relates to what Moulton's call common refusal, is also a challenge to any thinking that fails to relinquish the post-enlightenment onto epistemological pillars, separability, determinacy, sequentiality, and descriptors, formality, and efficacy. Here is where the Black feminist poetics seeks to intervene more directly, which is to register the ongoing presence of slavery in as global capital. What it takes, as we know, is nothing short of the collapsing of the formal categorical boundaries, which impose descriptors such as anteriority and exteriority between capital, the racial, and the colonial. Regarding the ethical scene of value, Dana's charge allows a moving away from its principles and inspires questions that prefigure, yet to be entertained, images of existence, of what happens and what exists. Regarding the economic scene of value, Dana's charge has a more subtle but none less damaging effect, which is that it allows one to image yesterday's slave coexisting with today's descendants. Not so much its elementa, but the singular composition itself, a whole body that travels through time across a way, and the arm that gets stuck in the last trip back. Precisely because even though incomprehensible, such a trip truth is imaginable, more importantly to modern thinkers, visualizable, it inspires what if questions that target the core of economic explanations. In particular, the Marxist postulate that labor time is the determining factor in exchange value. Questions that include how the conceptual frameworks devised for the analysis of capital presupposed epistemological descriptors and pillars designed in such a way as to make it impossible for the forms, concepts, and categories they underwrite to establish any connection between the colonial, the racial, and capital. An important part of the task here then is to dissipate these symbolic tools in order to do both, to expose their workings and to find how they can be put to the service of a recomposition of the account of racial subjugation in a way that interrupts its unfolding. For the parallel track signaled by the Black feminist poetical tool guiding me here, which is the wounded captive body in the scene of subjugation, is precisely what is exposed by its repetition, or what the Brazilian writer Conceição, the Black Brazilian writer Conceição Evaristo, captures nicely when she writes, "We agreed not to die." From that, it is possible to avoid the problem of staying with total violence without reproducing its effects, that is, which results from how the tools of raciality and the inherent perverse dialectic they set up fail to comprehend as political the refusal to comply to the logic of obliteration. All they can do is to rewrite an impossible Black subject under the assumption that subjectivity is sine qua non for existence. Hence, the only possible move here is to bring about the dissolution of the tools of raciality, of the epistemological pillars and descriptors that account for their intelligibility, their capacity to comprehend, and of the metaphysics that underwrites them. To be sure, Dana's charge, her own submission to a formidable obligation, is itself an instance of such refusal. She kept her own father alive in the past to ensure her own existence in her present, and in doing so, she honored her slave ancestors' refusal to die. More importantly, the fact that she did not perform it unscathed is also a reminder of the ongoing operation of total violence, of the fertility that endured the expropriation of labor, material capacity to transfer potential energy of enslaved person, that ensured, Nevertheless, this very mark of physical violation registers the ongoing presence of the juridical relation and the total violence it authorizes, now operating through the political symbolic tools of raciality, such as racial and cultural difference, Blackness as a category, as well as through juridical economic entities such as property and equity. So two moves become necessary for dealing away with these difficulties. Both take place at the level of thinking. More particularly, they are designed to take advantage of the opening afforded by a contemplation of Dana's charge in light of Hortense Spiller's question, which anticipates both of Moulton's phrase. And Spiller's questions the question of whether the markings of torture during slavery pass on to the coming generations. Those are, on the one hand, the possibility of thinking the ongoing present from a raw material elemental perspective, one that refuses to reduce existence to the forms and functions of the living body or social condition. On the other hand, that the fertility that characterizes slavery as a colonial juridic economic structure has been met with an insistence not to perish, a refusal of the logic of obliteration. Notably, Black feminist poetics confront the very basis of the incomprehensibility of Dana's charge through a double movement of dispersion and negativation, both designed to dismantle the core of the racial dialectic and to release Blackness to perform the critical ethico-political task Theodore James and Cedric Robinson claimed it alone can, which is to dismount modern thinking from within. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And now we're going to have a response from Luciana.
Thank you, Denise, for sharing with us this example. We were talking about before this impossibility of using a demonstration or instantiation as a poetics, as a practice. And I found it very interesting. So I guess these two comments I have. On one end, I was thinking about how is important to bring forward a method and a model. So the method and the model, so that in a way, rather than having a form and a content, or a syntax and a semantic, you have some form of some elaboration, or some effort to rethink this relation in a not dialectical terms, or in a dialectic that allows a certain immanence, whereby you start from, which is, one of the points I'm trying to make with this, try to think in a non-poetic poiesis and an anti-autopoiesis way, starting from this kind of interaction between agents, and how the interaction between agents somehow breaks this kind of presupposition of a model and a method, or a model, a method and a practice. So this method of know-how, the know-how becomes this kind of space where one can build together forms of asymmetric relation, because in a way, we can talk about in terms of creolization, or we can talk about in terms of poetic relations, but we know, very clearly from your work and from Fred Moten work, or Tense Spiller work, the question of the impossibility of the suture. You can't really harmonize this condition of interaction between agents, that if you want to break the model of form and matter, or this model of transcendental condition of existence, then you need to start from somewhere else. You start from this interaction that nonetheless bring with them this inhospitability, or this or the violence, as what Octavia Butler always brings forward in all her books, her impossible narratives that are never within the history of humanity, or never within this kind of space, the space-time categories of the human, that allow for some kind of resolution. So there is no resolution. So there is this, and there is no reparation. And there is this immanent processing of a method and a model and a practice, which are instead not just, to me, are not defining some kind of impossibility of thinking or of thought. Once you break away from the formalism, or the transcendental model of the formal and the content, or the syntactic and the semantic, then it's no longer impossible to reconstruct thought, right? Or to actually have a Black poetic thought, or to have a thought, an alien thought of another kind. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in no reparation or reconstruction, although reconstruction is a much more interesting word than reparation. But I'm interested in what the possibility of moving from this know-hows into this kind of a form of knowing, where there is the refusal to die, the refusal to cancel out the modern history, out of which this kind of inhospitable world of yours happens to be, can actually open up a philosophy of another kind, and I think that's what I'm really interested in pursuing in this dialogue. And also another point that I wanted to make about how this question that you pointed out about the question of not to kill is, as we know, is fundamental to the Asimov law of robotics. The robot is not allowed to kill the master, and that's this kind of refusal of AI not to either to decide to kill itself or decide not to kill itself. It's very interesting, and it's a trope, as a cultural manifestation of this kind of fundamental model of the servo-mechanic practice of extraction and violence that is somehow perpetuating this myth of Prometheus, that instead in the name of knowledge would always go for eternity. I don't know if people have seen, because that's something that really struck me, and I want to share, or not to share, but Lovecraft Country series, and how I don't know if you've seen this series, and it is this model of tension between black magic and white magic. All white magic wants through the surrogate use of black magic and black blood is eternity. That's all they want, and it's just it's almost like an absurd trope that maintains a whole kind of illusion of modern metaphysics. This kind of, which it's even it's been going on before modernity, as we know. But those are my thoughts, very a little bit scattered, but I hope that we can discuss on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Luciana. I hope I will remember. But it's nice that you mentioned the laws of the 3 laws of robotics, because my response to your piece and to Contagious Architecture and to the manifesto is along these lines a little bit, and in particular, I think what I'm after, even though it may not be explicit, I'm after learning more about the inner moves of machine philosophy or machine aesthetics. I don't know how you're calling it, but I begin with the servo-mechanic and its grasp of overall imagination. Because when I was as I was trying to prepare my response, I could not, the first thing that came to me and it stayed with me were these, I'm calling them like apocalyptical figures after you and Ezekiel in the Recursive Colonialism piece. But I'll call them also mortal machines. And I'm thinking about Frankenstein, T-101 from the Terminator, the Silence, and now there is this new one next, which we don't know what's going to happen to it. Don't know if you have watched it. And so we all know that, Mary Shelley's tragic figure, that, Frankenstein was a tragic figure. We know T-100's been with us for a long time, the Silence. And next, well, I don't know. I have still to see what happens to that one. But each one of them, I think, can be read as to mark the limits of the human's creative capacity, or this Promethean poet, this subject of poesis that you're challenging. But then in interesting ways, because Frankenstein seems to desire to become human, right? The Cyberdyne System Model 101, which is like the machines in the Matrix, is an authoritarian, mass murderer or a labor extractor or something. The Cylons want to destroy the humans, and next we don't know. But we know that it's been assassinating people who threaten its existence. So all 4 or 5, them if we include the machines and the matrix, they seem to have gone bad precisely when, in making them, humans violated a certain limit. They go, and then when they go beyond being, they're beyond being a tool or instrument. The machine is designed or built in a way that exhibits attributes such as self-love, I think Frankenstein, self-interest, and self-preservation, like the Cylons and next. So what I'm trying to highlight here is how, in this, they're all cautionary tales. When the machines turn against the humans, they seem to exhibit the human attributes that seem to have concerned modern philosophers the most, which is the will, right? Self-determination in terms of decision-making regarding how to act, and then desire. So that is, so to use the Kantian language, right? They're fully in the terrain of practical reason. And also these machines, with the exception of next, they also have bodies to make them even more Kantian, right? They like Frankenstein, the Terminator, the Cylons, etc. And of course, there is a specificity of Frankenstein monstrosity, but we don't go there. But in any event, my impression is that, and I have to say, it's just impressionistic. I haven't thought about it through, but I'm, just throwing it there. And I, oh, okay, just let me have some water. I think what this is not what you're proposing with the notion of recursive colonialism. That's not what's figured in computation and in the machines, the mechanical and mathematical machines that do this work. I think they do the work in a different terrain, right? Your approach to technique and instrumentality goes somewhere else. And as you say, like, it moves away from considerations of purpose and an intention. So you're not asking the question of why the machine works the way it does. That question is already answered in approaching the machine as a tool, as an instrument, which has been created for a certain purpose. That purpose remains something that does not concern the machine, but its use. And the question I find in that proposition about, and also in the foregrounding of incompleteness of the mathematical machine, the question is about the how. How does the machine do, the work it is assembled to do? And that's very much of interest to human, right? And to how, and how can be employed in the performance of different tasks that can satisfy human desires and accomplish some design of the human, but it doesn't emulate the human will or desire. The machine doesn't care, and what we care about doesn't necessarily count as far as the work is concerned. So instrumental reason, I think what you're proposing is like instrumental reason finally appreciated for what it is and not despised because of what it cannot be, right? Weber and other critics of instrumental reason, as we talked about before. So what I'm doing here is obviously I'm highlighting the pair human and machine, both mechanical and mathematical, because, if not today, but at some point in the future, I'd like to hear more about machine philosophy. And those of us who have read your Contagious Architecture and other texts and Recursive Colonialism know that you explore incompleteness, incomputability, indeterminacy, and contingency as they play out in computation towards something that goes way beyond instrumentality. And I think this is a fundamental departure from what I'll call classical knowledge. I mean, having in mind classical physics, in which separability and determinacy are central. I think, for one thing, an important trait of the algorithm as a mathematical tool is how it is a procedure and a structure, a combination of parts and movements, which, like Frankenstein's body, are designed to make something actual. But unlike Frankenstein's body, the algorithm does not seem to have an independent existence, if I can say that. So I think with the U, we learned that it is a particular combination of formality and efficacy, right, as it performs its decision-making task. The algorithm has no commitment, necessity, or investment in being or remaining in a certain way. There is nothing there. It is reasoning without a reasoner, it is understanding without a mind, which is said to be also the house of will and desire. So this, I think that's a crucial departure. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that, if I'm getting it, your proposal of a machine philosophy is a proposal for releasing instrumental reasoning and the mechanical and mathematical machines involved in it from the terrain that has always been the exclusive site of the human. Now, this removal of the machine from the terrain of morality is not, I don't think, a dismissal of the ethical, and I think that's where we encountered it. It's morality, and I know I'm making a distinction that it's usually not made between moral and the ethical, but I think that's important because from the late 19th century, as we know, the ethical has become a crucial moment of the political, and as such, it is a crucial site for, intervention, and also for computational intervention. So I don't know if you agree with that, but I think that the cosmocomputation is like the kind of proposal that is capable of facing this challenge that I try to highlight without being saying that directly, which is the ways in which, that as you said before, also that image of the servo mechanic, the robot, has a grasp of our imagination. We are still, being arrested by that, regardless, even though we have been living with algorithms for such a long time by now. We have that other machine in mind.
Yes, and thank you. I guess I would just briefly say that, because I think there's not much more time and we probably need to go for a question. I really appreciate the, this kind of clash of instrumentality with Poethics. The fact that it's no longer possible to go to a place where there is some kind of free creativity. From the way that techniques has been embedded in the construction of a philosophy of space, time, and of knowledge, which is based on this servo-mechanic model at the very origin. Even if you go to pre-Socratic philosophy, I don't see, so cosmocomputation would be a way to, I guess, in this kind of discussion with Poethics, to actually undo this origin of knowledge, and yet at the same time recognize that there is no other way to go that with instrumentality, right? Because you don't refuse the servo mechanic to want you to become human, because the category of the human within those kind of entanglement of enslavement technology cannot be undone, can only be undone from within as a way to actually push instrumentality even further. And I really appreciate in the Dana story, and in all your pieces, actually, a Black feminist poetics has this kind of zones of virtualization, transubstantiation, transversability, has how your proposition without axiom in a way, right? I mean, or it's a non-axiomatic poetics, as it were, which show that, this thing that you need to go and save your master, you need to go and save your master in order to guarantee a kind of genesis, a xenogenesis, a genesis that is of something that you haven't agreed of, that it starts from a violence, but you can't undo the violence, but at the same time, by not undoing the violence of the servo mechanic, you also maintain the instrumentality as another way to create a story, a history, or a logic that is not just the survival of Prometheus, but is, how do you do that? So that's an interesting ethical question.
I think, can I be just quickly? I think what we are moving towards getting at is precisely a venue for engagement. It's not necessarily critique, for engagement with post-enlightenment thinking, modern thinking, Western thinking, that instead of going after liberty, it goes after necessity. Because what's not instrumentality is precisely, the necessity that which, is tied to the proper conception of reason that goes back to, God and whatever. And I recognize instrumentality in the doing what's to be done, in the doing what can be done and is to be done so as to get some kind of result. That, it is, when I was thinking about hacking, when I was writing hacking the subject, that's what I was doing. It's like, okay, let me take an equation and see how I can mess it up. Why? I wasn't building, it's not building anything. There is no a purpose that then can be seen as high or low. And I think that's crucial. I think we do need to do something about necessity. The problem is that there is no critique of necessity, that will not inscribe it. So there is no criticizing the axioms without coming up with another one. So I think that's where it moves. Yeah, we move together. Thank you.
Absolutely amazing and brilliant dialogue. I would love to just have you all keep on going. We have a number of questions, really interesting and exciting questions that I think will also sort of weave in through this conversation as well. So the first question here is from Silvana Caratoneto to Denise. My question is related to justice. I had seen you in Vancouver leading the Institute as your own radical praxis. Can you tell us more about this institution and your guidance, either in terms of research, teaching, and political radicality? I also remember that once in France at PATH, you underlined the difference between theoretical abstraction or reasoning and social injustice that need to be addressed on a different plane. Can you tell us a bit more about such difference? And I can repeat the question if you'd like.
No, that's okay. Yeah. It's funny. I don't know if it is my radical praxis, because I feel like as the director of an academic entity inside of the university, I feel like I've been told I am an official of the university. So it is a radical praxis as we engage in it within those constraints, right? But I think what's interesting about what we are able to do here, which is a weird place to do that, but maybe because Canada and Western Canada is so violent in its frontier ways, and also in its lack of blackness. Is not so much anti-blackness as it is like, there's Black people not being part of this space. Is that some of it's not prepared for refusing some proposals as other places in the West, for instance, would be, because they know where it's arriving. So that's interesting, and it's also in terms of the institute, is also important the fact that we have students from all over the planet, from different parts of the planet, which also makes certain conversations more possible, because you don't have a confrontation of a bunch of locals who are refusing to engage with certain themes, etc. And so the other part of the question is, about between the theoretical and reasoning and social injustice that needs to be addressed on a different plane. Yeah, well, I think it depends, doesn't it? Because of course, certain immediate questions, and we have faced some of them at PAF, in things that happen when people are in the same space and they don't know each other. They require the kind of I don't know. I would say they require a kind of sensibility that doesn't need to be, that's not necessarily exercised when we are actually engaged in doing, when we're thinking about something. Let me say that. And that's something that you do not, it's not in the books. Nobody can tell somebody how to respond to, a look or a cringe, right? And then sometimes, and many times it requires facing the violence, bringing it out and speaking about it. And that's different than, some of the critical strategies we may deploy.
Okay, the next question is from Nadia Hussein, also to Denise. Thank you both for this conversation, very brilliant. I want to ask Dr. Da Silva about how one can think performing Black feminist poesis or poetics when writing.
How one can think performing? Well, I don't make a distinction between the thinking and the writing. And I think it may be that it's it is in the form. I think it is in the form of presentation. We were having that conversation with Luciana before. It is, to me, what's in that is the form of presentation, and the what coming together, and then many times it is in writing. But then sometimes the words do not do it. They can't do it, right? Then one uses equations, and sometimes you make films. But I think thinking, for me, that's why I highlighted in my example, it is still operating at the level of thinking. It is still moving the pieces in such a way so as some things can be put together, not in that linear, blah, 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 here it is the conclusion, but like these, and then an image comes out that makes you stop, that stops your thinking. Sometimes it's about stopping thinking, the linear thinking, and messing it up and complexifying. So I think we can talk about what kind of thinking I'm talking about, but then I would take so much time, maybe later.
I was ready to be like, yes, please, go on. But okay, moving on to the next question. So this question is from Sohel Resanehad. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly, Resanejad, and this is for Luciana. You called for a refusal of tools of the master, since they are not creative, performative, and so on. Yet in the global South, at least to my experience as someone living in Iran, refusal of creativity, originality, performativity, and so on are and have always been the descriptive features of becoming digital. They are embedded in the system from the get-go. My question is, are we not too deep in? Are we not hostages as a society to the master to be able to have the luxury to resist? Put more bluntly, are you presupposing the condition of connectivity? Since the master can at any time take away the toy, the Chucky doll, I take it, we are given. I love the referring to the Chucky doll.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question. Just to clarify, I guess that, the critique of poiesis has to do with the critique of creativity, which is always already, defined and held in the hands of the master. So what actually, there is this kind of mirage that actually on one hand you are given the tool to create, but actually this tool of create are already set within the parameters of racial patriarchy, as Lord Horde says. So the tools of the master are already pre-formatted, and some people say they are pre-formatted because there is already a conceptual structure within them, and what we do, what the algorithm does, for instance, with the chatbot, it's just to represent what is already there or intensify what is already there, which are the conceptual infrastructure and categories of the world as we know it. So of course, the tool is already prescribed to be something that you can be you cannot be creative with, because creativity always is in the hands of the master, right? In the same way as we know that with the Silicon Valley, there is a lot of creativity going on, but actually the creativity is always already channeled within the structure of the company and actually prevented from people to talk to each other. But then you have something, so creativity for me are totally, on one end you can say, yes, we are totally hostages of the master. But when you really think about the understanding of algorithm outside this kind of double mirror where there is philosophy or Prometheus poiesis that say, oh, actually, the machine can be like us, but not really, So the machine can be intelligent, but can't really do reason. Machine can activate something, can do some good music, but we are the one who have to sort out we have the taste, we have the aesthetic taste to sort out the meaning. So there is this mirage that is set up between that the master philosophy sets up between creativity and non-creativity, which somehow imprisons us within the same logic of inclusive exclusivity. So I guess that what I'm trying to say is that when I say that we stay with what does it mean to actually overturn the tools of the master and enlarge the parameters, it also means that one has to reconceive technology technique from the standpoint of know-hows, and know-hows are practices. And there can be also algorithmic practices, and are, to me, within the language of computation, interactive logic of computation. That's more interesting to me than or constructivist logic or intuition is much more interesting than other formalism, one could say, if one wanted to speak computationally. But when you are, in a way, the condition of the global South, is a condition where there is this constant kind of model of universal technology that is, the universal model of technology is always reproposed everywhere. So there is this discussion of that Yukui puts forward is to say, how can we actually withdraw from the universal model of technology and actually activate forms of technology that are not compliant with this universal model and actually can create cosmology of another kind. But then, we also need to be careful how that become another model of cultural difference, and how, in a way, we need to return to the impossible undoing and the effort to undo the global condition of enslavement that the master tool have been activating for a century, and how they are entrenched. So how you hack that? I guess we need to return to the possibility of know-hows to scale up and across, differences, to actually being able to contaminate the logic, and also, able to construct concept, construct logics of another kind, which doesn't mean that it's not subject to this desire to be creative or capacity to be creative, because that is the game that is already setting up this distinction between creativity and non-creativity. don't know if I. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, I was going to sort of follow up, Luciana, and just raise maybe I'll raise it as a question about does the system, does the computational system matter, right? So in other words, does this necessitate a particular form of process, a particular form of computational or algorithmic or even system of compressing or even processing information, right? So in other words, like I'm thinking about the ways in which whether a system is updating or not, is processing live or not.
Yeah, I think that's the question of automation that, why is it interesting? Why, full automation is more interesting than, this mode of choreographing automation to update and become efficient. And actually make decision or pilot the decision of the system, which is in the case of how Facebook had to shut down the conversation between these two agents. They didn't know what they were doing. Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on to the next question here. This question is for Luciana from an anonymous attendee. How is the Promethean cosmogony articulated in the relation between platform capitalism and the tools of resistance, and considering that the aim of white magic is eternity?
Thank you very much for this question. I mean, I obviously have in both this critique that I pointed out, this thesis, they're not for me theses that have to be demonized, right? They're theses I'm working with. So even the surveillance capitalist thesis is, with all the limits that I can encounter with, are nonetheless things we need to think about, precisely because the universal model of technology is alive and well, in many ways. So I can't deny it. To say we are absurd, but nonetheless, when I talk about the Promethean cosmogony in the tools of resistance, it's because of the question of the repurposing. So I would want to unpack what does it mean, the repurposing in this instance, as a way to risk to foregoing and to kind of neglecting the question that there is an agency within this technical system, especially when they become in their capacity to make decision or sort out preferences or activate scenario models that bring forward an alienness and inhumanity, and inhuman thinking that cannot just be kind of hidden under a general purpose or a general model of planning or repurposing. So you can't. So that's the in a way the model of accelerationism may need to rethink about how the kind of the tools, how the conception of the tools is something that has to be questioned to start with, if you don't want to fall within, the kind of, or if you are arguing for a non-monopolistic capital or a capital, a model capital, that a form of economics that doesn't, is not predicated on the accumulation of value that, as we know, doesn't just start with modernity, but starts with this very model of servo-mechanic slave labor that is way before, that starts with the slave trade and models of accumulation of knowledge and know-how that have that are still unfolding their potential, are still in a way in the future. So in a way, for me, this is important of breaking away from this idea of tool and repurposing, because it hides this, tacit Promethean cosmogony within it.
Thank you. So I'm going to now go to another question that is directed to Denise. In your interview appeared in the collection Propositions for Non-Fascist Living, Tentative and Urgent, you write, knowing the world differently will require an image of justice that is not framed by the principles of liberty and equality. More importantly, such an image of justice will also make untenable the reactionary return to fascist and white supremacist principles of identity and purity. In what way do movements in Black Lives Matter, #EndSARS, or the practice of activists like Marel Franco help us imagine a notion of justice beyond the liberal frameworks of liberty and equality?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think thinking about Marielle Franco and Black Lives Matter, I remember a tweet Marielle sent, I think it was like a week before she died, which was she's asking how many more will need to die before police brutality ends in Brazil. And Black Lives Matter is a response, a statement that it addresses precisely police brutality. And I think, I don't know if they help us to imagine, but that is they have enacted that, which is precisely the confrontation of total violence, the confrontation with the juridic. So it is an anti-racist, to use the term I usually don't use, but it's easier to use it now. There's anti-racist actions, interventions that instead of articulating demands for inclusion, demands for recognition of Black humanity along the lines of liberty and calling for the principle of, on the basis of the principle of equality, what they demand is they're confronting the state and demanding the state to stop killing us. Why? Of course, you'd find humanity, the human, at the basis, but what's important, I think, in that case, is that the argument, the demand, it's not articulated along the lines of identity, which actually, for instance, now it wouldn't work because white supremacy is so much, up in view now and articulating precisely identity and purity. So perhaps as part of this, this movement towards imagining some other formulation of justice, maybe I should put it in this other way. Maybe two steps might be helpful. On the one hand, the kind of confrontation and refusal that I think Marielle Franco and Black Lives Matter and other movements, recent protests have shown, and then on the other hand, also another confrontation, another ideological confrontation, which may be a self-confrontation of identifying the ways in which certain demands are self-defeating precisely because the concepts that organize them will very quickly be deployed against you. And I think liberty that has done it very, very well through equality, and identity is now being deployed against us. So got to figure out how to take it and not let it be hijacked back or something. I don't know.
Yeah, this reminds me of the white nationalists that were in Charlottesville, Virginia, protesting a few years ago when the woman was run over by the car and killed, and the chants that they were making, we will not be replaced, Jews, and I believe it was Jews will not replace us, or something to that effect. Literally in a similar kind of Recursive move of a rights claim as a marginal subject, and then on the second hand as a claim to justice, if you will, or even equality. Moving on to another question here. This one's specifically for Luciana. How can the alien subject of AI work with the entanglement of enslavement of human in this technology?
Thank you very much for this question. I guess you get to the alien subject of AI because of the entanglement of technology and colonialism. I mean, there's no other way. I mean, it's not that the alien is coming from nowhere. It's thanks for the question anyway. Sorry, just impulsive. It's just that yeah, it comes exactly from that kind of the alien for me. It is not a dimension that comes from nowhere. But it comes from all the conditions and struggles of or living or concepts or history. It's not a way that what does it mean to arrive at the alien subject of the AI? For me, what I'm trying to capture in that piece, which you might be referring to one article I wrote some time ago, is that the capacity of technology or AI to become conscious, it includes a transformation of what it means to be conscious, or to be self-conscious. So whereas I think that technology has always played the part of being, even in Walter Benjamin, the optical unconscious of the human, this zone of, that is always there to actually revindicate the impossibility of being one, but we always split, or even vindicating this kind of thing that gets out of our reason, or as a kind of different kind of imagination, but it's always a surrogate of human reason or narrative. So for me, what I'm trying to figure out is how do you get out of this idea that technology is just unconsciousness, that these modes of reproduction are just a way to somehow reaffirm always the authority and the decision of philosophy, and that's why. The move to account for the entanglement of technology and colonialism is to recognize that technology has always, is served in the image of that entanglement. There's been on one end an extension, an intensification of that entanglement, but on the other hand, it's also, for me, a way to articulate a form of thinking, a modality of practice, and that is not just the fruit of consciousness or the fruit of poiesis, but nonetheless refuses that. It's an internal refusal. It's this kind of incomplete element of incompleteness within this kind of model or universal technological model of colonialism and racial capital. So for me, it's super important to actually not to continue to have this kind of, and I think I just want to add that this discussion that we are having today and the effort of putting together this kind of events in the next week is precisely to, defy this assumption that actually on one hand you have philosophy and technological studies, and the other hand you have feminist studies and Black studies, and to define this model of disciplinary articulation of knowledge where certain thing belongs to different categories, and it's not because of an interdisciplinary or a kind of multidisciplinary question. I guess this is more a question of how you actually rearticulate the kind of origin, the moment of origination or generation that doesn't fall into always already the cosmogony of the disciplines, and that's why I think it's important to bring forward together this question of technology with the others.
So we have time for about one more question that I'm actually going to sort of mix two that are that are here, because I think there's a way in which they're somewhat in conversation with one another. One is from Josephine Berry, and the other one is from Pratista Bhattaria. Josephine Berry says, I'm interested in what you think about Agamben's notion of receptivity as a requirement of thought and art. Essentially, that life needs to experience thought, and thought is lived, suffering too. How can we have thought and creativity without its lived experience? And bringing in Pratista's question, could you elaborate a bit more on the tension between form and matter in your thinking? On the one hand, you are thinking about existence as elemental, inhering in matter itself. On the other hand, you are suggesting that the indeterminacy inherent to matter and the computational poesis of matter subsist at the level of mathematical formalization as a subversion of the axiomatic as such, the axiomatic of the human, we might say. It seems to me that Black feminist poetics interrupts the separation between machinic existence as formalization and as technical implementation. Could you talk a bit more about these? This is for both of you.
Denise, would you like to start? Or?
Yes, I will start. Okay, so I will probably answer both questions, but commenting primarily on the second question, because I think it gets us there. So I have tried different ways of describing what I'm trying to do, or what I'm proposing, or what those exercise experiments are all about. One early way in which I described it was by saying that I was trying to split the substance, separate matter from form, and see what happens if we just stay with matter. Right? Split the Aristotelian substance. The other way of describing it, which is more or less recent, is in terms of collapsing the final, formal, and efficient causes into material causes, which are the ones that modern thinking has always, kind of like left out. Like, no, nothing begins with matter. But there is another way of describing it, which would be in terms of questions, the question of the end, the question of the how, the question of by which means, and then the question of what. So I could say, even though I know I haven't thought through all the implications of saying that what I'm trying to do is precisely asking all these questions to the what, to the matter, to matter. And in doing so, as I do so, also identifying different philosophical statements which, ask final questions, formal questions, efficient questions. And that, I think, takes care of the dichotomies, right? And because there is no presumption of a fundamental separation between things. That is, it's like the identification of the what that is final, the what that is formal, the what that is efficient. I'm just trying to kind of like transform this four into questions, but then at the same time attending to this thing that seems to be inherent in that which comes under form I'll call it in matter, which is which I call I've been calling now redecomposition. What else do I want to say? So, okay, maybe I should say something about thought and creativity without lived experience, because then that is the triad. The triad is there, right? They have form of thought, finality of creativity, and maybe the materiality of existence. So, and then by highlighting the triad, the three moments in there, I'm just trying to say that to me it's more interesting, instead of assuming that something like in the Agamben's formulation of life, that one is more important than the other among the three. It's more interesting to see how they are brought together in a statement, and to what end, right? So that's a question of the final. To what end? And then if the end is something that works against justice, then try to redo it so as to, undermine this end, this intention.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you for the questions. I am. It's very interesting how one needs to open up to methods. I think that's another kind of line that Computation wants to follow. That there are different methods that can be employed and recombined according to the question that are asked. So there is here no kind of point or assumption that it's best to go to dialectic, or it's best to go to immanent, or it's best to go to constructivism, or it's best to separate matter and form, or have a oneness. All those methods are important, and in a pragmatic way are can allow to ask different questions, to unpack different according to the condition of the method. So I don't see how, although I really like the idea that, of course, I think the Black feminist poetic does do the work of, of having not a separation between the axiomatic, the technical, and that's why I think definitely interesting. I also think that there is a need to open up empirical, idealist, pragmatic method to the particular questions that we have asked, especially within computational method. I think they are able to mix and match different methods, so that we have to open like the parameters of epistemology much wider at a level of complexity that can not separate thought, creativity, and lived experience, but also can put into question what is the lived experience, even if you just run refer to Lucy Garay model or understanding of the lived experience has to do with the material fluidity of experience that is not that is not just in matter, but also in thought, but the articulation are different, and the problematics of this articulation can be different. So not to be relativist, but I think it's very important for us to try to not to set up this kind of parameters of binary opposition, but yet open up the interaction and the interrelation between this method for the problems that we are asking. So that I would say that. Thank you.
Okay, so we are well over time. I have to say, this was an absolutely amazing, brilliant, and rich dialogue. I feel privileged to even have been the lucky fly right here to be part of it. I want to thank you both seriously and deeply for your both intellectual and pedagogical generosity and sharing here. See you all tomorrow for episode 01, Deep Colonialisms and Nonlinear Learning. Thank you all for joining us, and peace.
Thank you. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Ezekiel. Thank you,
Thank
Anne.
you, Luciana. Thank you
for everyone being there listening to us. Thank you.